Hello. Hello. Hello and welcome. Yes, please do move up. We
Marked out nicely.
all right, perfect.
Because our lives went very similar.
I'm delighted to hear. We have very interesting people around here. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for being here. And welcome to everybody who's joining us from home for our 6th literary salon of the summer here at Congregation Sheriff Israel. We started this salon because as I talked to people all over the congregation, I kept finding that people were publishing books. And I don't know that COVID was the impetus really for the publishing. I think a lot of work had gone into it long before we hit COVID. But we had all these creative minds and writers here. And I thought how wonderful for us to get to hear a little bit about the books. So these 6 salons have had wildly different authors, wildly different topics, wildly different styles. All are available.
They're pretty wild.
All are available to view online. And here is number 6 with J.D. Horn. We're delighted to have you. So I'm Rabbi Jessica Graff. Welcome you here tonight. And I'll give you J.D.'s official bio to begin. J.D. Horn is the Wall Street Journal best-selling author of the Witching Savannah series, the Witches of New Orleans trilogy, and the standalone Southern Gothic horror tale, Chivalry. A world traveler and student of French and Russian literature, Horn also has an MBA in international business and formerly held a career as a financial analyst. He'll have to tell us about that transition before turning his talent to crafting chilling stories and unforgettable characters. His novels have received global attention and have been translated into Turkish, Russian, Romanian, Polish, Italian, German, and French. J.D. is originally from Tennessee. He currently lives in California most of the time, right, with his spouse, Rich, and their rescue chihuahua, Kirby Seamus. So J.D., thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Delighted. I'd like to ask you so many questions. Tell us a little bit about how you became an author, how you went to the genre that you kind of are known for.
Well, I has worked for finance for many years. I actually worked in the acquisitions accounting for Microsoft, and it was funny because doing such a quick career change from like being in finance to being a writer, it was fun going to parties because I went from having everyone ignore me to suddenly everybody wants to talk to you, which I do want to point out, just authors at parties, when you meet us, you have to remember 80% of us do not want to be there. 20% are there for the free booze, so just keep that in mind. But
it's so glamorous, isn't it?
Oh no, that's part of what I thought we would talk about, is that, when you write, everyone has this image that it's a solo thing, that it's somehow kind of glamorous, The truth of the matter is, it is a team effort. And there's a lot of grunt work to it, and there's a lot that happens after you type, finish at the end of your manuscript that has nothing to do with you. So it was an interesting kind of learning curve for me. I started writing full-time in 2012. That's when my first novel sold to the publisher, but I had to wait until 2014 for the book to come out because publishing is glacial, the movement of it, and you have marketing people, you have distribution people, you have lots of different edits that you go through, and so it is not a quick process. You don't say the end and then have the movie producers showing up in your doorstep the next day. So,
Well, how did you decide to start writing?
I always wanted to be a writer, and when I hit the tender age of, I guess, 45, and I had a really frustrating day at work, and I decided I was not doing what I wanted to do. And I had an idea for a book, and I had actually started working on it probably about like 6 months before. And I thought I could spend the rest of my life putting all my energy into a job I don't enjoy. This wasn't the Microsoft stuff. My Microsoft friends, please don't get mad at me. This was much later. I can put your life in doing a job you don't enjoy, that isn't what you wanted to do, or you can take a chance. And I was lucky enough to be able to take the chance to. I switched from working full-time as a full-time employee to just contracting. And that was great because when you contract, you leave at 5. And everyone loves you and everyone thinks you're smart. As different than when you're as a regular employee, so you leave at like 10. So I decided to do that. I started working on my first book. It took me probably about 9 months from that point to have it ready. And well, I'm actually telling a lie, because I wrote my first book here in San Francisco in the 90s, and I black it out because it was such the experience. I spent time trying to find an agent, trying to find a publisher for it, and it was such a devastating kind of experience back in the 90s that I put the whole idea aside. And years later, I met Rich, and his father was an author. And I mentioned, I wrote a book at one point. And Rich wanted to read it, and I gave it to him, and he's very smart, so he loved it. And he convinced me to take it back out again. And this book, I found an agent who said, I don't think I'll be able to sell this, but I know like 6 editors who might want to see it. So all 6 of those editors rejected it, but 3 of them gave really good notes saying that we actually love your characters, we love how you write. We can't sell this because it is not what is selling. And if you write a story that is like this, with this kind of element, blah, 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 it will sell. And I thought, like, I need to be depressed for another decade, which was my natural inclination, by the way, or I could take the notes and try again. And that was when I came up with the first book, The Line, which sold in 6 weeks. And so it was kind of a shock that that happened. So I went into that genre, partially because I've always loved ghost stories. I always loved spooky stories. And so I sort of followed my natural inclination and came up with sort of, it's a new adult / regular fiction kind of series, sort of on the cusp of the two. And it did really well. And so people always chuckle when they see that I had The Witches of Savannah. And my next series was The Witches of New Orleans. And there's a reason for that, and that's called marketing. Because my publisher came to me and said, okay, we would like to do another series with you. And I sent them all these different ideas. And as a joke at the end, I said, or I could just do Witches of New Orleans. And the marketing people saw that, and they loved it because it was already sort of a niche that was carved out and a path that was clear for them. So that's how I ended up writing. They said they wanted basically something completely different that was exactly the same. So that's what I tried to give them.
How would you describe the genre, your genre?
Well, it's funny because I'm making a genre jump, but what it's described by the marketers is contemporary fantasy. It has for me strong Southern Gothic elements because I am from the South, if you can't tell. And it has a little bit more horror than most of the contemporary fantasy I think would have, which doesn't sit well with a lot of readers, but some really like it. So. And
what was the advice that they gave you about turning it into kind of, marketable works? I mean, because it sounds like once you came back with another draft.
To be blunt, they didn't, okay, this was 2012, 2011, 2012. They did not really want a gay character as a lead character, and that was kind of it. So I took my gay character, I made her a young woman, and after that, things went very smoothly. So.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, David Pearlstein, who's here tonight, spoke about his book, which is, the main character is a transgender performer, and it's very interesting that over these 10 years, at least, the literature has evolved. Society has evolved to be able to love and appreciate and embrace gay characters, I hope. Do you feel that way? I
do think so, but I do feel I have to be fair and honest that first book was kind of my training book. And it's one of those things I'm kind of glad it wasn't published now, but at the time, it was not a happy experience. But I think that a lot of first books, you find out people's first books that published, maybe their 7th, 8th, 9th book. And so the story I told in that first book, I wouldn't want to tell now. And so I'm kind of happy that it just went the way it did. So
that's interesting. Erin Gordon, who was our first speaker in the series, talked about a manuscript that she had locked away and that she had looked at once and was not revisiting. It was just, the first book, and that was fine. And it was kind of a practice book, and her writing evolved, which makes a lot of sense. So have you written gay characters into your published novels?
Oh yeah, all of my books have gay characters. It's just that they have not up until the Witches in New Orleans book. I kind of slid that one in because everything that I started out with, although my editor at 47 North, he is wonderful, he was wonderful. He was completely on board with anything I wanted to do, but you don't find out that the main character is a lesbian. Actually, she doesn't really find out she's a lesbian until about a third of the way into the book. And so all of my first series has the main character's uncle is gay. And his partner, the man who becomes his partner, is a detective. So there's always like a mystery element too. My standalone book, there is a gay character who is not in the book, and he is a character that everyone references, everyone knows, everyone has a viewpoint about, but he is actually not in the book, so you don't ever really encounter him. So it was a fun one. I mean, it makes sense if you read it, but he's the handsome young guy who goes off to LA, and everyone else kind of talks about what he left behind him. So.
Oh wow, really interesting. So are most of your books, would you say they kind of all fall into this genre of fantasy, or would you say spooky fantasy?
Spooky fantasy, they do, partially because when I signed with 47 North, and oh gosh, it's embarrassing because I had the first 3 books in the series, and they signed me for a 4th, and I started writing the 4th, and had a little bit of a nervous breakdown with it because I could not figure out, I couldn't get it to come together. And I had started working on a novella just for fun, and it kept growing. And I thought, I need to keep writing something or I'm going to freeze up entirely. So I ended up having Chivalry completed as a novel when I had the other book due, and like 6 months before. So I was not a terrible author, but 6 months before, I contacted the editor and said, I don't think I'm able to finish the book I'm signed for, but I have another book. And I swear, his voice was like, just send it. So they ended up picking up that book to fill the space that my 4th book was supposed to be in. And then they came back to me again. So this publisher, 47 North, they only do fantasy, horror, and science fiction. So having the relationship with them, having them come to me, which is a miracle, that was sort of what kept me working in that genre for quite a while. I decided to make a leap for different reasons. And I don't know if we're ready to move to that point or not yet, but in the conversation, but basically, I ran out of ideas. I told my stories in that genre. I have readers who are loyal, but I have what's called the first book curse. My first book did incredibly well. And after that, none did as well. And that's kind of the kiss of death for a publisher. So even with like selling multiples of what the average book sales are, if they don't see your numbers growing, it's kind of like, oh, it was nice knowing you, kind of. But so that was part of the reason I'm doing the jump, because I want to be able to approach new readers and bring what I think I do best into a different genre.
In a little while, maybe you'll read to us. But what is your new genre?
The new genre, I'm actually doing sort of a double flip. I am starting off easing my way in with a psychological thriller, kind of like a domestic thriller. And what is fun about this is that it is a domestic thriller featuring a gay couple. And that's kind of unusual. It's most domestic thrillers are about the breakdowns of a relationship. It can be like with a married couple, with partners. It could be, like one of my favorite ones is The Mother-in-Law. It's about mother-in-law who has a really difficult relationship with her daughter, and it flips back and forth between the two, her daughter-in-law, and it flips back and forth between the two characters. And as you see, as the story progresses, you see that they're both actually really good people, and they just don't understand, you know. But it's kind of like, it's almost like a reverse domestic thriller, because as you read more, you realize that they're both good people instead of one of them being bad. But this is, it's fun for me because it was a chance to bring things that I do really well into a different genre. I think I do plot twist incredibly well. I do family issues really well. And one thing that multiple people told me is that I do alone really well. So I had one editor say that, who pointed out to me that all of my characters are loners. And I realized that even when I have a character who's surrounded by family and friends, yes, they are still to some degree loners. So I've been able to bring that into this thing as well.
Wow, where do you get your ideas from? I mean, spooky fantasy, spooky thrillers, even these kind of domestic, you know, where do these characters come from? You just wake up in the middle of the night and scribble notes?
You know, this is where you find how crazy I am. I had started off working on The Line, and I'd written to page 150 like 4 different times, trying to get past this point. And I hit the wall each time at page 150. And I was sitting there, staring at the screen, and this, I mean, okay, if my medication ever gets adjusted, my career's over, because I heard a voice. Yes, I did. I had an actual auditory hallucination where a character said to me, it's like, the script was like, boy, if you will listen to me, I will tell you what happens next. And that character stepped in. She was only supposed to be mentioned. Her name only was supposed to be mentioned in conjunction with her grandson. She ended up booting her grandson out of the book, out of the entire series. She took over. She wrote the first 2 books for me, literally. She kind of almost dictated it to me. And by the time I got to the 3rd book, I realized that neither I nor my main character were going to grow if we both kept relying on this one character. So I'm afraid I had to write Gilo out. And she is not in the 3rd book until sort of close to the end. 10-year-old spoiler alert. But one of the great things was that the publisher, they let me come back and do a prequel about her life. So I thought, well, this is going to be easy, so easy, because she's going to sit down, she's going to tell me, blah, 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 just like the other books. I start to write her story, nothing. Nothing comes. This is the one I was sort of having a nervous breakdown about, because I couldn't get anything going. And I swear, it was only after I got the book written, went through all of the edits, went through the copy edits, and the publisher said, yes, this is the final version we're going to publish. I swear, I had the feeling of her standing behind me, folding her arms across her chest and saying, yeah, that's my story. In saying that, it's like, I gave you 2 books, you owed me 1. And so that's how funny I am. So I don't have problems coming up with ideas, because there are a lot of people who live in this head, and they're all wanting to talk to me. So it's just, you know, as far as specific with the genre, ever since I was a little boy, like I said, I love spooky tales. I loved Dark Shadows when I was a very tiny tot, even though I was forbidden to watch it. I don't know if you know what that is. It was a gothic soap opera with, I'm not making this up even, it was a gothic soap opera featuring a vampire and witches and werewolves, and I was not supposed to be watching, but I always sneak in and sort of catch it from watching from the edge of the room. And one of my favorite things is that since I've been writing, I've got to meet some of the actors from that show and hang out with them, because it's kind of like, you know, just a blast to be able to, you know, it's been over, gosh, like 55 years since it went off the air, but it was one of the few shows from that era that they actually kept the tapes. And so it's been in syndication for 50 years.
And so this stuff doesn't give you nightmares?
No, this does not give me nightmares at all. What gives me nightmares are things that can really happen. like real violence, like I cannot read things about the mafia, about gangs, because that will give me nightmares. But I'm not too worried about being attacked by a vampire.
So you can keep fantasy in its own
Yes.
space in your head.
Yeah.
So let me get this straight. A non-real, non-existent character dictated the books to you.
Let's talk about reality.
Is that... Well, an author, you had a second author, kind of.
Basically, and I think you hear about this a lot, maybe not as crazy with me, but a lot of people feel that they were inspired somehow. I mean, they're the same people who acknowledge that, yes, I created this and I did this whole thing. It's still, even when you have the help, it's still a lot of work. So you're there crafting the story and things, but I do feel that quite often, like with this book that I've just finished writing, it was fun because it's the only time every single character was there. They wanted to be there. They wanted to play. They wanted to be who I wanted them to be. And it was just a blast to sit down and write it. And that's the first time I've had that experience where every single one of the characters was clicking for me. But I do rely on this process of where I sort of go into a meditative state and I listen to the voices who start talking to me.
That's awesome. I mean, you really get into the characters and write their lives.
They do.
They help you write their lives.
They
Do they go to the grocery store with you?
You know, they go running with me sometimes because when I'm trying to figure out plot points, I'll just like go into my little zone, and that's when they'll be more able to sort of like talk to me. And but no, I've had characters fight with me before. I had one of the books. I had 3 or 4 different starts because I could not get the main character to agree to any of them, and she was just like, "No, I'm not having this." And finally, I came up with the start. And it was like, I went from being like this fun sort of lightning to this huge dramatic boom out of the gates. And she said, okay, I'll do this, but you have to do this. I forget what it was she wanted. But she wanted something special in the book. And I'm like, okay, you're the star, you get what you want, so.
Wow. Amazing. It's an amazing story.
Whereas Rich says, kind of unnerving, He always says, but I can't believe I married you.
Where do you write? Do you have a special place where you write?
I can write anywhere. We live part-time in San Francisco, part-time in Palm Springs. I write here, I write there. We are in Oregon part of the time. As long as I have a space where no one's going to bother me except my chihuahua, I'm good.
So you write at a desk?
Yes.
And the characters gather around?
Okay. The kind of crazy process that I go through, and I've never confessed this before, but as I'm writing, I sit down and I focus, and it feels as if there's sort of like a globe that forms in front of me. And I watch it, and I kind of move into it with the character. So it's kind of like, it's like this whole little experience that I go into. And so Rich doesn't understand why I get so upset when he comes walking into the office and talking to me, when I'm writing. So like, I have to get back in there now, it's like, it takes a while, so.
You have to lock the door, bolt it.
Oh,
something.
no.
So nobody can bother you.
Yeah.
Is there a ritual that you do to begin writing? Is there something that you do to enter into that space?
Not really. I think it's just becoming still. It is kind of like a meditation, but it's a meditation that is where I open myself up to kind of what's running around in my head and actually start listening to it and playing with it, and that's how it starts coming out.
What's it like to see your writing in so many other languages? I'm sure you have a shelf with all the books on it, right?
It's fun. It is fun because just looking at it, like there are words that you supposedly wrote in a language you don't know. I'm lucky that I have a friend who's Russian, because I was worried when the Russian editions came out that they were going to take the uncle and make him an aunt, because it would have been fairly easy for them to do. She's like, no, they kept everything just like you had it. So, but it's fun. For some reason in Poland they love me, and I don't understand why, because I'm quite blatant about writing gay characters, and they don't seem like gay people there very much anymore either. So it's Poland and Italy are the 2 countries that I have done best in.
Oh, wow, and you've traveled to present your books in these places?
No, it's just international foreign publishers, they will go to, they're like the bookstores, or I'm sorry, the book auctions in Frankfurt and London, and they will go and buy rights to different English language books and bring them out in their own edition. It's the Turkish version, they actually use the same cover. The Russian versions are kind of amusing because it looks kind of cartoony. I don't know, it looks like a 1960s romance book, the covers. So it's always a surprise to see how different cultures kind of approach the same story.
And do you have to approve those covers?
Oh, you don't get any approval, no.
Oh, you just get a copy of your book.
If you're lucky. I still haven't gotten, I think it's the Romanian, I had to buy the second book, and I still haven't been able to track down the first one.
Oh, wow.
So it was supposed to send me like 5 copies, and so if you're listening out there and you're in Romania, I could use one.
How does your Southern upbringing influence your writing? Or does it?
It totally, completely does. As I said, everything I've done up until this point really is Southern Gothic. And I love Southern Gothic. The joke about how you take the boy out of the South, but you can't take the South out of the boy. I am that person. I ran screaming from Tennessee at 17. I've never lived there again, but I am still a Southerner. And it's quite, it's difficult sometimes because there are good things about Southern people. And I like bringing those forward, but you're always feeling like you're having to apologize on the other hand for some things. So what I bring into my books is that the first series, yes, it's about witches in Savannah. It's also about the rise of neo-Nazism in America and racism. The second series is about witches in New Orleans, but it's also about the abuse of power and people doing whatever it takes to get into power and to stay into power, even if it means like denying an election, I don't... So
imagine that, fictional situation, not.
Yeah, no, that was a bleak period. Actually, I started writing that series in 2016, and I had envisioned an entirely different story. And it's funny because I contacted my editors. I'm like, I don't think I can get this in. It's like, I'm so depressed, blah, 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 blah. And everyone's depressed. You get this in. So I ended up writing a very different story, which was about a young woman learning that the people she thought she could trust were more interested in promoting a certain way of life that was not something that appealed to her.
Are the books, they're located in the South, right?
Yes.
The characters, but is there a lot of Southern culture? Would you say, is it specifically Southern? Would a Southerner really be drawn to understanding kind of the in-jokes of Southern life?
I don't have any in-jokes in there. They're perhaps a little too serious at points, but I have had the first series set in Savannah. I've had people contact me saying, I grew up in Savannah. It's amazing that, you've captured the city so well, because a lot of people write about Savannah, but they don't really know Savannah. So I always make a point of really getting to know a place, except for this last one, which I'll tell you about. COVID is the problem with this one. But with New Orleans too, I really went and I try to bring the cities, they become characters in the books. And I knew I'd done really well because, in the New Orleans series, there's a character who is, she's a witch. She also runs a strip club, and she, gosh, I forget what the other element was, but then, I had this woman contact me. She's like, I used to be an exotic dancer, and I'm a witch, and I grew up in New Orleans. She's like, you got it all right. I'm like, yes. So,
that's amazing.
yeah, but I do. The pacing of the story, the language of the story, the attitudes of some of the characters, both good and bad, it's all very Southern, and that's part of why I rebelled a bit with this last book, because I thought, I don't want to write about the South again, because I've done it. I've done it like 8 times now. And so I pulled out the map, and I'm like, I think I'm going to write about the Northeast, So I decided I was going to write about Maine, because I wanted to find a beautiful small town on the coast, or in New England at least. And so I was going to Google and like prettiest villages in New England. And Camden, Maine popped up as #1 for most of them. My normal process about this would be I would go there, I would spend a week or two, I'd come back, I'd start writing, I'd go again. I would interview a lot of people there, and I would really get to know the stories that people in the city tell about themselves, the locations, and it's sort of like, I love walking tours. I would do a walking tour of my own living room if somebody would offer it. But I love walking tours because that gives you great material. But there was this thing called COVID, and I ended up writing a book about a place I had never been. And I ended up going just March to see if my lies stood up. And luckily they did stand up.
So you learned about this town just from the internet?
Internet, I thank God for Google Earth. You know,
Wow.
I walked around that town. I knew where I was when I got there.
Yeah.
But to be able to use Google Earth, use different like historical newspapers and current newspapers, and going and watching video clips of people who lived there, who visited there, posting things. It gave me a good enough idea to sort of write about the area. I was very lucky though, because I needed a very specific thing for the story. And using Google Earth, I went and I found the plot of land where I want these guys to live. And then I had to make sure that this one element worked. And so I go there, and the first thing I do is go to visit the harbor master, because I know he's got to have the answer for me. The harbor master was never in his office, and he wouldn't answer his phone the entire week I was there. I could never find the man. I thought, I'll go to the library. They'll know. Librarians know everything, and I do, for the record, love librarians. I go there, and the guy's like, you know, I don't know. He's like, have you tried the harbor master? I'm like, yes, I've tried the harbor master. So this is where I feel like the universe does occasionally look out for me, because I'm walking along and I have the inspiration. I'll go talk to a real estate agent, because there's a good chance that they will know this information. And I look on my phone to see where the closest real estate agent is, and somehow manage to walk completely past it. And I'm suddenly in front of a completely different real estate agent. And I thought, well, I'll just go ask them. I go in, I'm like, I'm going to be wasting your time. I apologize, I'm not looking to buy anything. I'm actually an author. And it was really embarrassing because I was actually wearing a black turtleneck. You know, it's like total humiliation. Central casting.
Looking the part.
I know, right? They were so nice. The head of the agency's like, oh, come on back, you know, ask your questions. And I'm asking my little list of questions. He's just getting this increasingly strange look on his face. He's like, this is so weird. I just sold a property exactly like that last week. And I'm like, yes, you probably did, you know. And it turned out he had sold the house that I used the property for, and he knew everything about it. And it was like, just, you know, check. And luckily he's like, oh God, the people are gonna love it. This book gets published, they're gonna love to know that it's set there. I'm like, I'm glad to know that.
That's amazing that you could get that clear of a picture from the internet. I remember David in his talk, you know, talking about the train schedules and the food available on the train, and researching things that, you know, were in your case in ancient history, but not ancient history, but not available now. But the ability to research from home in your slippers, you know, and to really get to know a place.
With a chihuahua on the lap.
Absolutely, with a fuzzy blanket and all that. But you know, to be able to understand this place and to be a part of it as if you're walking around, never having been there, is really an extraordinary thing now, given the internet, but also your talent in pulling the right information off the internet.
What I worry might be missing though is that I worry there may not be the actual flavor of the place. And I've tried, and I felt good that the plot stood up and everything, like the locations work. I don't have somebody, okay, you can write having like dragons flying over New York City. No one's gonna blink. But if you're writing about a place and you have somebody turn left onto a street you can only turn right onto, you will be getting hate mail from readers. It's like, so everything works physically, but unless you actually get to spend time in a place, and I did spend time, like a week there, and I got to speak to different people, but you know, I wish I could have had a little bit more time to, you know, kind of get to know it better.
Yeah. Will you read to us from this not yet published book, this brand new?
Will.
We're work of art.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear some of it and get a sense of how you describe this place.
Well, we actually don't get much description about this place because it starts off in New York. It is a domestic thriller, as I said. It's about a gay couple who when we first meet them, well actually, in the second chapter when we meet them, they're doing their road trip up to Camden. And because one of the characters he went there as a boy, and he fell in love with the place, and so they're doing their first weekend getaway there. But being that it's a domestic thriller, you have to start off with a thrill. So I'm going to do a little bit of the first chapter, then we're going to finally get to meet the guys. So,
okay.
The Silence of Us, Chapter 1, The Present. I'm being shaken. My head bangs against the wall. I open my eyes and see Riley. He is squatting before me. He's speaking. I can't focus. The light is too bright. My eyelids too heavy. My head lolls forward. My eyes close and I begin to slip away again. Riley slaps me, hard. My head jerks up. My eyes snap open. I see his hand pulling back. Another slap. My vision fills with shooting sparks. I focus on his hand, more than half again as big as my own. Once I felt his hand would always protect me. It's trembling, as if it's itching to strike again. I reach for it, for strength, for support, to fend off another blow. Riley snatches it away. My head tilts. I'm looking up into his face. His eyes are wide open. He's horrified. He peers down his nose at me as his lips tremble. I am repulsive to him. I try to speak, but my lips won't form words. I only manage to puff out air. I see the steam of my own breath, the sight making me aware of how cold I am. Shivers rack my body. I realize I'm sitting on the floor beside an open door, the frigid night air streaming in. Riley is speaking again. His powerful hands grasp my shoulders. He shakes me again till I feel sick. I slap at his hands until he releases me. I turn to the side and heave. When I sit up, Riley is standing, towering over me, eclipsing the overhead light. What have you done? His words cut through my haze. The light smashes into me as he bends over me. He snatches me up off the floor, off my feet. His steely fingers bite into my forearms, bruise me. You're hurting, I manage. You're hurting me, I manage. Riley stuns me by bursting into tears. He folds me into his arms, his embrace so tight his tenderness hurts almost as much as his rage. He rocks back and forth, carrying me along into motion, sobbing like a heartbroken child. What have you done? His words come out in gasp. Nothing, I say, although I don't think he hears me. My cheek is pressed hard against his chest, and my voice comes out weak and raspy. I haven't done anything, I say, with as much volume as I can muster. His embrace softens, but he doesn't release me. He steps back, his hands resting on my shoulders, holding me at arm's length. He studies my face as if he's trying to decide if I'm lying or insane. He turns me slowly around until I'm facing away from him. I begin to take it out of the room, our kitchen. Congealing blood forms a viscous skin that stretches across the floor and trails outside. I stammer, I don't know. I spy the carving knife on the floor, its straight, sharp blade, a compass needle, pointing in the direction of the open door. I notice the sock of my right foot is dyed garnet. My eyes travel up my legs, up my shirt, along my sleeves, to my hands, all stained the same hideous purplish red color. Riley releases me, and I tumble forward. I've grown so used to his support. I right myself and turn my head to watch him as he trudges outside. I hear his sickened wail. Trembling, I follow the sound of his keening. He senses my presence in the doorway. Stop, he calls me. He turns back and holds up his palm. Don't come any closer. You don't, he falters. I don't want you to see this. Behind him, at his feet, I make out the outline of a body. Chapter 2, The Past. We start off at 6:30. Riley behind the wheel. I navigate, although that means I hold the phone as satellites tell us where to go. Riley ignores the robot voice. He knows where he's heading, working his way up to 96th to merge onto FDR. He's focused on the traffic, on the wheel. I feel my breath catch at the side of him. It's still 30 minutes till sunrise. I study his profile in the fractured, frenetic flashes of oncoming headlights and illuminated signage, a Dwayne Reed and a Mercedes, followed by a hardware store. My eyes trace down a straight nose, linger on his full lips, and fall to a strong chin, his cleft only visible when he glances over, scanning traffic for a brake to move into a faster lane. There is no faster lane. I hold the phone as the voice chirps unheeded. I close the app. Riley grips the wheel of my father's car, a 20-year-old Range Rover my father rarely used except for drives out to our summer house in East Hampton. It unsettles me how right Riley looks at my father's place. Something someday to discuss with a therapist. A new one this time. One who hasn't diagnosed me from what they learned about me from TMZ at Perez Hilton. Yes, hash it out one day, but today I don't care. Stopped at a light, he seems to sense the weight of my stare. "What?" he says, facing me with his brow furrowed in mock irritation, but his lips parted in a way that makes it impossible not to kiss him. So I do. "You need a shave," he says, and the blast of a horn makes him pull ahead. I rub my palm over my cheek and chin. "Blame yourself. You shouldn't have kept me up so late. I didn't hear any complaints out of you last night." I'm jittery. I blame it on the caffeine I downed to get me going, although I know it isn't the coffee's fault. I remind myself this is only a road trip, a weekend getaway, but it's our first in the 18 months we've been together. And, as any important first, it feels both momentous and risky. We're heading north, a pilgrimage of a kind, traveling up the coast to an area Riley remembers from childhood. A perfect place where he once spent a perfect day. A contiguous trio of seaside villages in Maine is elevated to a picket-fenced Shangri-La. I wish on a semi's blinking turn signal that the imminent future won't taint the impeccable past. The sun rises and Riley squints. I hand him his sunglasses, a cheap pair he bought from a street vendor. Probably not even UV polarized, but he thinks their mirrored lenses make him look cool. He does look cool, but I think he's the one doing them the favor. I offered many times to buy him a quality pair for his last birthday. Golden wood, or at least, very least, Ray-Ban. Nah, he rebuffed what he made sure would be my final offer. I'll lose them. Spent half my life trying to find them. If I lose these babies, he said, tapping one of the lenses, it won't matter. Just go get another pair. He likes things he can walk away from, things he can replace. I found this insight and way to discuss with my theoretical therapist, no doubt in conjunction with the boy electric complex I appear to be cultivating. Sunlight warms Riley's not quite honey blonde hair. I put on my own shades. We have one planned stop before we truly get underway. A visit to his sister Emma, who lives in Quincy, a bit south of Boston, in the house where Riley grew up. He hadn't, he said, seen Erin or his nephew Luke in over a year, and calculated it was in fact closer to 2. He played it down, said he could visit them another time if I didn't want to take the time out. I've learned Riley only offers to accommodate when he really wants something. Otherwise, he's after a simple yes or no. As to him, either response is of equal value. Maybe he wants me to meet his family, or maybe he wants me to meet his family, or maybe he needs them to meet me. Perhaps it's nothing more than a kind of fetishism, a deep-seated desire to begin the second odyssey to his personal paradise, at the same starting point as the first. Besides, Riley's the one on the timetable. He's taken off for a 4-day weekend, which is to say he'll be videoing into the office for those meetings too important to postpone, and having client calls roll over to his personal number. I have no pressing responsibilities to rush back to, only a flexible 2-day-a-week volunteer commitment at Dignity Station, the drop-in center my mother helped establish for people without housing. I brought my sketch pad to keep myself busy while he's distracted. As traffic eases, Riley turns on sports talk radio. He listens, grows irritated, snaps it off. We ride together in a comfortable silence. The silence of a rapport so deep it obviates the need for words. The solitude of a trust so complete it doesn't crave reassurance. It is the silence of us.
Wow.
That doesn't last, by the way.
I can't wait to get a published copy so that I can see what happens in
You
this.
and me both.
What do you think is the length of time until this is going to be available in a bookstore?
That's kind of what I thought would be fun to talk about. So at this point, I think most people have the image that when you write a book, you say it's finished and then somehow it gets sold and somehow you just move on. There are millions and millions of books written that never get published, really good books. It's a business, and so like if you're going to be working as a full-time writer, as an author, you're going to be writing genre. I don't think anyone makes like a full-time living off of anything other than genre. Like you'll be working as a teacher or as doing some other kind of job in conjunction, but to write full-time, you're going to be writing genre. You have a filter that you have to go through. You have to, most publishers will only take a manuscript that's presented to them by an agent. So your first step is you have to find an agent. So imagine you are along with hundreds of other thousands of people trying to land an agent who will be willing to like your book well enough to take it out, attach their reputation to it, to take it to an editor. So that's the first step, and that's a hurdle that a lot of people don't make. Assuming that you get past that hurdle, your agent is probably going to want to put their own imprint on it somehow too. So like with my agent on this book, we actually did quite a few different sort of drafts on it. Then the agent takes it out, and the number of agents, hundreds of thousands of writers, hundreds of agents, dozens of editors. So you have the agent presenting the book to different editors, and you're hoping to get one of the editors' attention. If, by some miracle, the publishing house does pick it up, you're looking at probably 18 months to 2 years before it actually will be in a bookstore.
Because it's going to go through so many edits and so many revisions.
Go through, you'll probably do, on my other books, I think it's probably a fairly similar experience for most writers, you will do probably 2 or 3 rounds with a developmental editor, then you'll do a round with a copy editor, 1 or 2 with a copy editor, and that process will take anywhere up to 6 months usually, maybe a little bit longer if it's a long book.
Did you feel a lot of relief when you put your pen down? I know you didn't write this with a quill, but was there some sense of, even though it's not ready for international sale yet, was there some sense of like, I finished this, I finished a draft of this?
Yes, there was for me, because I had reached the point where I was worried I didn't have another book in me. And so I had the 8 books come out. The first one came out in 2014, and so it was sold in 2012, 2014. I had like a year and a half to write the next 2 books, that was the contract. And then following that, I was on a contract for like 7 years, bringing out a book, like having to bring out a book about every 9 months. And so what happens is that you're writing the first draft of one book, working on the edits of another book, and then doing the final copy edits on the third. And so it's, at some point, especially when you're writing a trilogy, it gets kind of like, which book did that happen? And I don't remember when that happened. So going through that, and sort of just, getting to the point, like with all that's been going on in the world, I just wasn't sure that I had another book in me. So this was very much a gift to me. By the little crazy people who live with me in my head, that they're like, we're gonna get, maybe that's why they were so cooperative. They're just being nice to me for a change.
Well, are they suggesting that you have yet another book in you?
Well, hopefully. So the process with this is that my agent had just took it out like about a month ago. And so it'll be several weeks yet before we get, any view, like, if anybody even wants it. So if nobody wants it, there's a good chance that there may not be another book, to be honest. I'll have to figure out what I'm going to do next in my life, because it's, I've had a good run. I've had like 8 books published in a row, and that is a miracle in and of itself. I don't know what I'll do next otherwise. I mean, I'll probably keep writing, but I don't know.
You've never written about the Jewish community, right?
I've never written about the Jewish community.
Any neurotic, characters who might run around and give you some ideas?
There might be a few. Actually, I lie. I do have Jewish characters in my books. The first series, one of the witches is a Jew, and she is, this is amusing. I mean, it sounds really funny, but it actually works in the book. Okay, I had a development decision to make. I needed to have a group of different families represented, and I could either introduce several characters for one scene or figure out a way to combine them. And so I ended up having the Jewish witch create a golem, through which all of the different representatives from these different families, they use this golem as sort of like a representative viewpoint, so they're all kind of merged together. Wow. Long story short, very long story short, something happens where jolt of magic, a bit of each of these different families, each of these different people gets, their psyche gets stuck into this one body, and he becomes a full-fledged, a real boy, if you will. So the nice Jewish boy, because as the Jewish character points out, she was the only woman involved with creating this guy, so he was Jewish, whether they elected him. And so the nice Jewish boy is the girl at the end of the series. So.
Okay. Well, you've also not written about San Francisco, right?
I haven't written about San Francisco, and
because it seems like this would be a great city for some kind of a, spooky, I don't know, kind of thriller in the hills and the cable
It'll
cars.
probably happen at some point.
Yeah.
But, assuming that this sells and the publishers still want to keep selling my stuff. But for me, when I'm writing about a place, I need a distance from it. So if I write about it, I'll be sitting in Palm Springs writing about it.
Okay.
I find it helps to, because part of when you go and you really know a place, you have to forget part of that to write, because it has to become your version of the place. And having too many actual real life details is just problematic sometimes. I am actually, if it's published, there are 2 characters that I intend to not exactly spin off, but to borrow for the next book, which will hopefully be the beginning of a series about a gay detective, sort of like Anne Cleeve's latest series is about a gay detective in England. I would be writing about a character in Palm Springs, which, as I just said, is problematic because I know Palm Springs too well. So I'll probably be sitting up here writing that.
Good. We look forward to having you here. Do you have any questions?
I do. You mentioned working with the development editor. How did you find that relationship? Were you being asked to do things you didn't want to do, or did you find yourself?
Yes. The truth of the matter is, and this is hard as being an egotistical writer, that I will say at least 90% of the time the editor is right. And when you're having a little temper tantrum, it's better just to get it out, let it happen, and then sit down and actually think about what they're saying, because they're distant. I mean, they care. They care about the book every bit as much as you do, but they're distant enough from it that their ego's not involved. And so that is a very, very good person to have involved in your book.
Does Rich help you edit at all? Or, sometimes people keep a book from a partner until it's like in a beautiful binding, or sometimes people
he always
breakfast table.
He doesn't really help with editing, but he, like this book, he helped me figure out the ending because I couldn't quite get the pieces to come together. He had a big effect on my first series because I planned to end the 3rd book at a specific point that he did not like. He did not like that. And he woke up screaming, having a nightmare because of where I left the book. I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to have to go through and change it. So I ended up condensing what was going to be the 4th book into 2 chapters because I had to somehow spin out of this. And so he does have quite an effect on what I write, but editing, no.
Okay. Any other yes, please.
Yes,
Audience
I'd
question?
like to say something which is a common and maybe a question. First of all, you made a very good, prolific argument of why nobody should become a novelist.
Whoops, sorry.
Okay? If I was a young 25-year-old college graduate in English literature, bachelor's and a master's in other literature, and I hear you say, I'll go to dental school, okay? Because the difficulty of getting published, which is it's very realistic. It's very, very difficult. It's like being an actor. I remember my parents asked me to go to Pasadena Playhouse. I said, you gotta be kidding. You know what it takes to be an actor? You know what kind of headache it is? The last thing I want to do, even though I was good, the last thing I want to do is be an actor, because realistically, the things you find. So this is a very good argument for not being. Also, at the same time, you can very argument for being a writer, because you went into financial planning, so your mind is very organized in a sense, and then you got bored, and then the imagination that's in your brain that you cannot give to anybody else, the questions that the rabbi asked, everything is in your mind. When you're a writer, it's in your own mind. When you're a novelist, it's not a story where you're a journalist. Everything is in your mind, and you can have a lot of things in your mind. That's why it's a very solitary work. In a sense, it's better to live alone so nobody bothers you, and just go out to eat and just get whatever you need for your physical necessities, whether it's sexual or food, outside of your home. Because it's a very solitary thing. And you went to Camden, Maine to do this, which is a very, very interesting thing, and you went back again. if you want to publish this, why don't you go to Camden, Maine, go to the mayor, and say, put up $100,000, and all the people in Maine will buy a copy. Anyway, the question is this. There was an author in Palm Springs where you live. I don't know if you met him, Herman Walk. Herman Walk is an international, you know who Herman Walk is?
Oh, Herman, yeah.
He's an internationally well-known author. He wrote Marjorie Morningstar, War and Remembrance, so on and so forth.
I looked at his house when he was selling it.
Came Mutiny. Well, I knew Herman. And Herman wrote a book called The Hope. And he wrote it about 10 years ago. And it was a failure. And Herman was very depressed about it. And Herman never got the Nobel Prize for Literature. And he would not even accept any other awards, because he was a very decent guy. He was very much in the Jewish community. He was very religious. And he went to Chabad. And he was he wouldn't accept anything. He was very depressed because he never got the Nobel Prize for Literature. So it's a very, very difficult thing that you do. And it's honorable that you do it, and it's good that you were here, and I wish you luck. Maybe you should go to dental school besides.
Well, you know, it's interesting what you're raising, and that you even, the title, The Hope. I had a really interesting conversation yesterday with someone who was talking about, he works in international politics, and he was talking about kind of living in this time of hopelessness and finding hope, you know, and how on a personal level, when there's something you really want to accomplish and it feels so overwhelming or so impossible, how do you keep up the hope? And our conversation turned to kind of world politics and the situation we find ourselves in, you know, the sort of unprecedented, at least for those of us alive now, moment of despair in a lot of ways. And we talked a lot about how, you know, what are the places where you gather hope, even in the face of something that feels so overwhelming and that we don't have that much control over. So how would you say, I mean, as an author, you know, having expressed what you're talking about, both the impossibilities of publishing and of taking your characters and bringing them to life, but also you keep doing it, right? And there's a certain passion, a certain hope that supersedes any kind of hopelessness. Where does this come from, and how do you keep that up to keep writing?
You know, I'm not really sure. I think that if you're a creative person, there's a force that will keep you going because it's how you cope. It's sort of how you relate to the world. It's, for me, I think quite often I break off little bits of the world to put in my head and process, and I do that through writing quite often. I think that even if you go to dentist school, you're still going to become a writer. If you want to really write, if it's something you really want to do, you may not make your full living off of it. Only a crazy person such as myself would even try. But you're still going to write. And even if you can't get published by a traditional publisher, you can choose to self-publish if you want. That is a great path that didn't really exist 25 years ago. It has its own pitfalls. I looked it up because I was curious. There are currently on Amazon 33 million books, and it's discovery is the hardest thing. Quite often you will have, as much as we all talk about Amazon, those algorithms do help point the right reader to the right book better than many other marketing things have ever been able to do.
I think this is a wonderful end to the conversation today, and also to the series, because it brings back so many things that we've talked about in these other conversations about the passion for writing and sort of a feeling of, you know, in your kishkas, like you have to do this, you have a story to tell. I love your description of these voices who are helping you to write, which, you know, we've asked each of the authors, how do you do your work? And
everyone else was saying.
No one else described their work exactly this way, but I love it. You know, everybody has a passion and a story that has to come out, and a sense of, you know, an unwillingness to let that story not be told. And I think that that's driven everybody forward. We've talked in the series of 6 salons about self-publishing, about what it means, you know, to tell a story that's long been hidden or that's picked up on something from childhood or from something that was tucked away. Everybody's everybody's mentioned something that their own family has contributed sort of subconsciously in a way.
Down to me, start our own family.
or location, or something that's just about your identity. And then we've talked about the way that that's kind of deviated maybe from, their kind of directions that came from the past, or that came from where you grew up, or that came from one's family. But then when characters start to emerge, they might take a sharp left turn or just go some other direction. But there's a kind of a hint of something that that is the seed.
They all have their DNA. All your
Yeah.
characters have their DNA at some level.
Yeah, and that's kind of a brilliant way to think about the characters that we've heard of from the other authors too, because everybody talked about sort of the way that the characters represented who they were, and also the specific choices that those authors made to then say, and this is how this character is not like me, right? So you get to really create humans, and in your case, they even come and hang out with you.
Hey, some of my best friends are invisible.
I love that. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, JD, and we really look forward to reading this book or manuscript or whatever you'll let us read as soon as it comes out. So congratulations on finishing this, and we can't wait to hear great next steps. Thank you so much.